Solo knots.
Solo knots. Well, solo knots is kind of weird because people just turn their whole life upside down to be able to go to Flag because it can't be delivered anywhere else, and they have to stay in the hotel, and they have to be able to go back there twice a year, and they have to generate all this income and blah blah blah. And they get sec checked. They get sec checked coming in the door, they get sec checked on the way out, and they get sec checked in between, and it's a great way to use up those hours. And an intensive NOS auditing costs about $7,000 for 12 and a half hours of auditing. If you buy a bunch, they'll give you a discount because they have a sliding scale. But it's just a money grubbing thing. And of course, you're auditing something that's bullshit anyway because it's more exorcism of these beings that supposedly are stuck all over your body or your space or something. So it's more of knots, except that you are auditing it solo. And one thing that people should know about Flag, that calls itself the Mecca of technical perfection, is that it is really the Mecca of technical perversion. Because while they're out there blowing their horn about how perfect it is and how friendly it is, they are really causing a lot of people to become unglued and indirectly contributing to their death. If the person hasn't committed suicide, they go crazy. I know of one guy who just went off the deep end on solo knots. Just went totally like crazy. And in my case, I thought that I was done with the level. I came to Flag 2 because I couldn't find anything more to audit, and I saw floating needles everywhere, and it was every indication that I was done. And they didn't, they have a metered action to verify if the person is completed. They didn't put me on that. They just told me, well, Ron audited X number of hours, and you haven't audited as many as he has, so you cannot be done. And this is like unthinkable at the Mecca of technical perfection. And a lot of people, Scientologists, have no clue of what a house of horrors that sandcastle is. But it is. It's very scary, and it's becoming more scary even in recent years. And thankfully, I got out when I did. I had totally repressed this incident of completing solo knots or thinking I was done and then being told I wasn't, because the whole thing was money. Because if I stayed on the level, they could get all this extra money out of me, thousands and thousands of more dollars. And I don't know who makes the decision. It's probably Miscavige, who has a hand in making the decision, because I know he likes to micromanage everything. So I'm sure that some of the people come through okay because they have to have a certain percentage. They would lose their reputation if they screwed up everybody that comes there. But Solonas is a very scary level. They are imprisoning people, just like in the hole. They're keeping people under guard with 24-hour guards and stuff. That's been talked about online on some of these message boards and wherever. And if you're watching this video, do your due diligence, do your homework, check out the ex-Scientologist message board, the Clambake message board, because there are hundreds of horror stories similar to mine. I was kept under house arrest in Clearwater when I was actually off solo knots at that point, but I was off because of some ethics thing, or, well, I forget what. I fell off the level in the end of 1994. I was totally out of money, and I couldn't even put up a pretense anymore. And so, but in 1997, when I had moved to Clearwater, I was basically under house arrest. And I was living in my place in Clearwater, and I had a job and stuff. But I had to report into the RTC rep of the Sandcastle nightly with what I did that day and a whole bunch of other stuff that I was supposed to be doing. And I was under house arrest, basically. And, you know, with all the screaming and craziness that went on there.
But you managed to keep your sanity on the OT levels.
Yeah,
For the most part.
I did. And when it got to be too crazy with the money, I just fell off the level, meaning I stopped auditing, and I never went back. And that was fine, because the whole thing was very crazy. First of all, you're auditing something that doesn't exist to begin with. And second of all, you think you're done because you think you're done and you're brainwashed. And then they want you to keep on going because they want to squeeze more money out of you. So the craziness factor or quotient just got up enough that, it was time for me to bail from that craziness. So I did, but I was under house arrest in Clearwater in the year 1997. And my ex and I were doing an ethics program, and we were having our heads bashed together by the RTC rep. And I thought this was unique to me, but then when I started to read the message boards, I saw there were hundreds of stories like this, people fighting with the MAAs. I had to write KR's knowledge reports on my CS because the things that they were doing were so outlandish and crazy that if I had not been so deep into the Kool-Aid, I would have just fucking walked away from it. Years ago.
Things that the CSs were doing?
Yes.
Like what? Like off tech?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I can't really go into it here because I'd have to explain the whole tech, and we'd be
That's
here
fine.
for days or
That's
weeks.
fine. I'd
So-
never heard any complaints about CSs before, I guess, specific to CSs.
Well, I had a particular situation that was unusual, and yeah. Okay, so I fell off the level, and then I kind of was just sort of functioning on one cylinder, like figure an big 8-cylinder engine. It's running on one cylinder, and it's pretty bad news. So I moved back to LA, and then I just continued working and trying to live my life, but I had gotten really, really ill at this point. Shit, right? So I was diagnosed with all this stuff, all these diseases and stuff, and so I was just kind of, it was basically, I was slowly dying because it was time to get out of the cult and I couldn't realize it. And I remember in 2002, this is something that Tony reported on his article that he did on me. In 2002, I was trying to read things online, things about Scientology. I knew that Tori Chrisman, my friend from Inside, was out now and speaking critically about the church. I wanted to know what she was saying, but I couldn't look at those things. I couldn't read the quote-unquote Nth Theta because I got so physically, and I was so sick already with this health crisis that I had, that I couldn't read that stuff. So I kind of just sort of barely subsisted for the next number of years, and I was trying to minimize my involvement in Scientology at this point, and I knew something was very fucked up about Scientology and the church, and I couldn't put my finger on it. So the first thing, and now we're getting ready to talk about Debbie Cook, okay, because so I was kind of hanging on, thinking, this is something very wrong, and just getting worse and worse every year. And finally, the Debbie Cook email arrived just in time. It was New Year's Day of 2012, and I read that thing when it came. And for the first time, I was able to read through without feeling ill, because Debbie Cook was a member of the tribe. She was a very respected executive, and so when she said something, it was again the opinion leader thing. She was like an opinion leader for a lot of people. People would be willing to listen to what she said, whereas they wouldn't be willing to listen to something that maybe Tony Ortega would say, or Mark Bunker. But people would be willing to listen to Debbie Cook because she was an opinion leader. And the things that she said made sense to me. So all of a sudden, I realized, dang, I'm in a fucking cult. And I've been in a cult for all these years. Holy fucking, I wasted like 3 decades of my life or so in this fucking cult. And so at that point, my cognitive dissonance started to return to normal. It wasn't all the way there, but it's like layers of an onion when it peels off. It peels off gradually. And even in the first few weeks, I said, well, wait a minute. Okay, I see all the stuff about Miscavige with his slush fund, but what about this thing and that thing and the other thing that Ron put there? And I remembered how he looked at the Tony Hitchman interview, that interview that he did where he's interviewed by Tony Hitchman. It's up on the internet. You guys can watch it. But I remember how I looked at his facial expression, and it looked like a leer, like a mean, nasty leer. It looked like not a friendly, natural smile, but it was like a wicked leer. And that kind of bugged me. And so I realize now that that was my cognitive dissonance kicking back in, like normal, like it should have been all that time. And so that's when I started to read the stuff about Hubbard, and I realized that, you know, the stuff that the church biography of him is just bullshit. And I was living in a rooming house for Scientologists in LA, very close to the PAC base, and I had to keep my mouth shut. It's known as being under the radar at this point, because I at least realized that Miscavige was perverting Scientology. But then, you know, some things started to poke through my consciousness, like, why did Ron leer in that video? Well, because he's a con man and a lying fucking drug addict, scheming snake oil salesman, which I can admit to openly now because I see and I've looked. But at that time, I was kind of half in, half out, sort of in limbo, and I wasn't ready to look at that time. So I had to leave and keep my plans for leaving a big secret, because the house wasn't a safe space for me. Everybody else in the house was in the cult, and yeah. So it took as long as it took. It took me 6 months to leave there, and then I left and went to another location, and I had to decompress and chill out for several months in my new location and handle that, the craziness of just getting out of a cult. I thought of getting therapy. As soon as I realized that the whole Miscavige thing was a fraud, I realized that psychotherapy is a valid form of treatment, because it's like a house of cards, and as soon as the bubble was pierced or the balloon was busted, I could see those things, because it was my cognitive dissonance returning. And so I guess we're kind of at the end of this story. There are a few other things that I may want to talk about, and so I don't really have any more to say about leaving Scientology.
On the subject of illegal PCs,
Okay, illegal PCs are people who have had psychiatric treatment or who have attempted suicide. In some cases, the person can have connections to government, or even be married to someone who has government connections, which make them ineligible to receive auditing. And there's a policy on illegal pre-clears. It's called illegal PCs, and it lists out all the various categories of people who are denied auditing, the auditing side of the bridge. But they can do training, and they can become auditors, and in some cases they can petition to receive auditing. I know of one person who had attempted suicide at a young age, maybe around high school age, and she was allowed onto services, but she had to petition every time. And she had to do certain things, things that were helpful to the expansion of Scientology or whatever. But she was allowed to do services, like I said, each time petitioning. But I want to talk about people who died, and I specifically know several people who died of cancer. And there seems to be some huge proliferation of Scientologists dying of cancer. Some of them are dying on the upper OT levels. Many of them are dying on the upper OT levels because at FLAG, the Mecca of technical perfection, in quotes, which I like to call the Mecca of technical perversion, They are having things run on them. It's called reverse Scientology. When it's done with Dianetics, the term for it is black Dianetics. But the auditing commands are reversed, and different other things are done to produce the opposite effect of what it's supposed to do if done correctly. And a lot of public are not aware that this is what goes on at FLAG. It's really a torture chamber inside, and all those beautiful paintings and facades and architectural detail is just a trap. It's just to make it look really beautiful, really aesthetic, and they like to call it a distraction-free environment. But people are being murdered inside of those places, slowly, or just maybe drawn a little bit closer to death, because the life is gradually being squeezed out of them at that point on the bridge. And this is something that when you come into Scientology and ooh and ah about how wonderful it is, you have no clue of what's in store if you stay. Because if you get into the Sea Org, you're fucked. You can't get out. If you become an executive and you're holed up in the hole or someplace similar, you can't leave. If you're on a high OT level and the CS doesn't give you okay to leave, you're stuck there for months at a time. And there are even people on the upper OT levels who are sort of like a prisoner at FLAG, where they're under guard and they're being watched and they can't leave. I was under house arrest for months in Clearwater, and I wasn't even on Solo Knots anymore. But for some reason I was targeted by Miscavige to be treated this way. So, does that answer the question? Okay. Oh yeah, so let me also say that some of the illegal PCs who thought, because they were so brainwashed, they thought that Scientology was the only road out, the only salvation for them, the only hope of their eternity. And when they were denied auditing, they didn't just jump off a bridge and end their life, but they pulled in cancer. I'm thinking of one person in particular who I knew, who was done a lot of training and got up to class 5 auditor training, was never allowed to be to receive auditing, and so she was an illegal PC. She wound up dying of breast cancer in 2002. It was, kind of a way to, instead of just walking away, well, they couldn't walk away because they really believed all this crap about how, their eternity is going down the toilet if they don't stay in Scientology, that it's that or nothing else. And then another person died around the same time. Actually, 2 more people. I'm thinking of 2 other friends that I had. One person went to FLAG in the late 90s who had been clear, was told she wasn't clear, and this is a thing that FLAG is doing wholesale. They're telling people who are clear that they're not clear, and of course the whole state of clear is bullshit to begin with, but people are so confused and at this point that they don't know what to do, and they believe all this stuff. So the fact that they believe all this stuff is that it goes against their reality to such a degree. This one friend who was told she wasn't clear disagreed with it, came home, got cancer, and again died of cancer a couple of years later. And another friend was an illegal PC because of marital connections. She was married to someone who had, been a member of the Secret Service or the CIA or something, and so of course she was an illegal PC by being married to him. And she also died of cancer because she thought that Scientology was her only salvation. So it's just so dangerous on so many levels. So I'm hoping that my own personal experience can shed some light on this for some people who might otherwise fall into the trap. Okay, so in 1996, at Christmas time, I had a car accident, and I was crossing the street as a pedestrian. A car hit me, and I flipped over and landed headfirst into the street. And I was feeling pretty crapped out after that. I was very lucky to be alive. And then when I went into the FLAG office in Los Angeles, Larry Gilbert, who's the tech person there, informed me that I must go to FLAG because it was very out tech to not have a PTS interview after something like this. And so I was pretty broke. I was on disability because I wasn't working. I was broke anyway because of being a Scientologist on the OT levels and not, having some big company that I was running, like Craig Jensen's company or one of those companies that generates a lot of income for Davy. So I was pretty much at a low point in my life and just kind of dragging ass because I really did not want to die. I had a very strong will to live, but I was finding plenty of challenges in my road of just continuing to live or function. So anyway, here I was with injuries from this car accident and on state disability because I was too injured to work. And somehow I go, for some reason, someone pulls me in to see Larry Gilbert at the FLAG office. Oh, you must go to FLAG. Well, I was so broke that I didn't have money for the airfare. So I said, well, the only thing I can think of doing is hock my mom's engagement ring. I had my mom's engagement ring that she had given me. It was like a family heirloom kind of thing. And basically I pawned it. And a Sea Org member drove me to the pawn shop where I hocked my mom's diamond ring. And I got $350 for it, which was the price of a round-trip ticket to Clearwater, or actually Tampa. And then they drove me, once I had the cash from the ring, she drove me to the airline to buy the ticket. Now, at the time, and people at the FLAG office were putting together this trip for me, it was known that my most recent PC folder was on the Freewinds. It wasn't even at the FLAG land base because of something I had done on the Freewinds. And so they know also that because the Freewinds is on the ABC Islands most of the time, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, they're called the ABCs. They kind of shuttle back and forth between those islands a lot of the time, that I couldn't get to, that my PC folders wouldn't be accessible right away because there are no daily flights from those little islands to the mainland US. So, but they said, no problem, we'll take care of it. You just go to FLAG. So I show up at FLAG, and I had money on account at the Yachtsman, which I scrounged together in order to make this trip because Larry Gilbert had told me that I would probably die if I didn't get this PTS interview. Wait a minute, my thing is... Yes. So
you were down, I'm trying to remember where we were. You were down in the ABCs. They were saying, just come to FLAG, and we'll take care of that.
Right. So I got up to the part where the Sea Org member took me to the pawn shop to pawn my mom's ring, and then drove me to the airport, to Burbank Airport, where I bought my ticket to Tampa. So, okay. So then I paid them some money, so I have accommodations in the Yachtsman, which is the cheap hotel, but it's on the base, because, they can't have you staying off the base, because they shit in your pants when you do that. It kind of ruins the crease of the uniform or something. Okay, so I arrive at FLAG, and it's late at night. And the first thing that happens, even though it's like fucking 1 in the morning, is that the van driver drives us to the Fort Harrison, where we have to meet with the medical liaison officer. The medical officer, because you cannot be allowed on the base if you're sick. You have to be healthy enough to be allowed, because I think this is a lot of damage control from the Lisa McPherson thing, that they now require you to pass sort of a little preliminary interview given by the MLO before you can route in, as they call it. So fine, I passed that thing and I routed in, spent the first night there, and then I spent the whole day in the ethics office or being routed in, seeing the various terminals on the routing form. And I have to say that when you sign in early on the routing form, you have to sign all these releases and stuff about how you're not going to sue them if they do this, that, and the other thing, and how they can do the introspection rundown or whatever the hell it's called. That is fucking scary. It's so fucking scary and so fucking messy and so fucking serious that, it's like, it's like they're holding a gun to your head. And you have to, they give you a whole file full of these releases for you to sign before you can go anywhere, that you're not going to sue them and you're not going to give them a lot of shit. So that part is really scary, and that part made me feel like I was in an implant station or something. That was kind of, oh my fucking God, what am I getting into? Because it felt scary. I just had a scary vibe from that. Okay, and then I had to go into ethics, and you have to write, they have these computers that you sit at and write down all your activities. If you're doing yoga or whatever you're doing, they got to know about it. And then, okay, so I was there for my second day there, and I hadn't routed in, I hadn't gotten any auditing yet. But at 9:10 p.m., the MAA calls me in to tell me that my folders never arrived from the Freewinds. And they've got some kind of new rule that they scared up out of nowhere, that if the person is on the base for 48 hours without their PC folder being present, they have to go off the base. So I was basically thrown off the base in the middle of the night and told to go find a motel somewhere. So luckily I had been speaking to a friend of mine who's a local in Clearwater. She's a Scientologist. She had a car. I called her. She had actually offered to put me up at her house, but for various reasons it wasn't feasible, so I stayed in the Yachtsman. But when they wouldn't allow me to stay in my prepaid room at the Yachtsman because that was considered on the base, and I couldn't be on the base with any of the Cylons. So I had to go and find myself we call it the WOG Motel because it wasn't a Scientology hotel. So we found some flea bags. My friend drove me around Clearwater, and by 10:30 at night, she had paid because I was totally broke, trying to just get over there for this auditing that I needed so desperately after my car accident. And then they throw me off the base because my PC folder isn't there. Like that's going to make me a terrorist or something. Anyway, it's a security risk or whatever. I don't know. So I have to go find a hotel, and I didn't have any money for the WOG Motel, and it was a horrible, dirty flea bag. But my friend paid for it on her credit card because she basically loaned me the money. And then I called into Flag the next day, and they still, the folder had not arrived, blah, blah, blah. And then I stayed one more night in the ratty WOG Motel. And by that time it was Friday, and I said, you know what, I'm not even going back to Flag. I'm going to just bail and go home. So I got a van, the WOG van to to the Tampa airport, got on a plane and went home. And later I found out that Friday, the day I went home, was the day that my folder showed up at Clearwater. So if I could have stuck it out a couple more days, I could have been serviced. But I think I did myself a favor because I was pretty much done with auditing at that point. It was just like, hello, through all the fog created by the brainwashing and the Kool-Aid, I said, you know what, this is crazy. This is just too fucked up for words. So I went home. And then I was talking to my MAA from Flag, and she was the one who told me that the day that I left Clearwater, the folder showed up from the Freedmans, blah, blah, blah. But she said, oh, you're not eligible to be on the base because of your health condition. And so we're going to arrange for you to get this auditing that you need at AOLA. So I said, fine. So I start routing into AOLA at her instruction, and I spent the whole weekend routing in on that routing form. And after a day and a half of that, I was in the MAA office at AOLA, and I was talking to the MAA, and she said, AOLA has decided not to service any more Flag Public because we've been doing it for a few people as a favor, but we really don't want to service Flag Public anymore. Flag Public belong at Flag, and AOLA is for AOLA Public, so we're not going to service you. So go back to Flag. So it's like a yo-yo thing. Flag had sent me to AOLA, AOLA was sending me back to Flag. Guys, aren't you embarrassed? You got all these billions of dollars in your slush fund and you can't get this little piece of admin shit straight? This is like fucking ridiculous. So that was the end of my attempt to get auditing. And as you can see, I know you can't see very much, but I'm fine physically. I'm just doing fine, especially since leaving the cult. And so that was the story of the Wag Motel. And this is just a story, my own story, but this was just another horror story of the kind of crap that people are put through. I'm sure that I had a very low rating as a Solonauts auditor because there's a whole color-coded hierarchy of which are the best PCs that you can deal with because they're the ones who will flow thousands of dollars to the cult, and I was no longer in that category, so they just kind of had this fuck you attitude towards me. So that's fine because I'm dispensable, so just as well. And so that was the Wag Motel story.